Now, we start this hour with a briefing given today by Russia's defence minister, who announced the introduction of new measures in response to the downing of a Russian military plane in Syria a week ago, an incident Moscow has blamed on Israel.
We're sure that the implementation of these measures will cool some hot heads and will keep them from ill-judged moves that could threaten our servicemen. Otherwise, we'll be forced to react according to the situation at the time.
OK, well, to discuss this a bit further, we're joined now by artist Murad Gazdiev in the studio. Murad, we know that these S-300 systems will be moved now to Syria. Just take us through, though, what it means and what will happen, do you think?
Well, the steps that Russia is taking will doubtlessly change the situation on the ground in Syria, and perhaps radically. But Moscow was very clear the situation had changed, and that necessitated further changes on what Moscow and what Syria are doing. The overwhelming concern, according to the Kremlin, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, is pilot safety, and that overshadows everything else. So, firstly, they're going to supply Syria with S-300 missile systems, air defense systems, and that in and of itself is huge, because these systems are much more powerful, much more versatile, with far greater reach than anything else that Syria has, and it is going to make any potential Israeli bombing foray into Syria much more difficult. But let's not forget that Russia held off on doing this, on supplying Syria with S-300 systems for many years at Israel's request.
I want to underline that in 2013, Russia responded to Israel's request to put on hold its supplies of the S-300 to Syria. That's despite the weaponry being ready for delivery and Syrian military personnel having undergone training. Today, the situation has changed, and that is not our fault.
Secondly, Syrian air defense command centers will now be equipped with automated fire control systems, which basically means the Syrians will be able to amalgamate all of their air defense systems, be it S-200, Books, or whatever else. They'll be able to fire much quicker, much more accurately, with much greater precision than they were able to do previously. But perhaps most importantly is that these systems come with friend or foe identification, which will hopefully prevent another friendly fire incident. Thirdly, no less important, any object, be it a missile or a jet, that is attacking Syria from the Mediterranean will now be jammed by the Russians. That is radio-electronic jamming, that is satellite navigation jamming, communications jamming. So Russia says that this will hopefully prevent any or cool hot heads and prevent a situation like this from happening again. The Syrian president has been made aware of the steps that Russia is taking. Him and Vladimir Putin talked on the phone, where Putin again reaffirmed Russia's commitment and readiness to take more steps, to take more effort, basically to take take steps to make the situation in Syria safer for Russian pilots. But they're being very careful about this. They're saying that this isn't targeted at any nation, be it Israel or anyone else. They're saying that they're doing this only to protect Russian pilots. Nevertheless, this is all very serious, and Russia said that what Israel did was entirely unexpected. The Russian Ministry of Defense conducted a special investigation, which they had just concluded, and they found that the Il-20 aircraft, which was patrolling the airspace over Syria, monitoring the situation in Idlib, that it had no time to get away from this Israeli airstrike, because the 4 Israeli F-16s that showed up began bombing Syria. They only warned the Russians 1 minute in advance, which was not enough time. And as icing on the cake, they then took cover behind the Russian aircraft, drawing Syrian missiles to it, making it a target. And the Russians, judging by how serious these steps are, they're determined never to let this happen again.
OK, thanks, Murad. That was Artis Muradgazdiev there with the latest. We can talk a bit further on this topic too, because John White now joins us. He's a journalist based in the UK. John, thanks for coming on this afternoon. We were just, in that discussion we had there with Murad, he pointed out that, look, Russia says we've implemented this new system to protect our military. We're not necessarily targeting any other nation with it. But how will the rest of the world then, and perhaps the Western coalition, view this, do you think?
Well, they'll certainly view it with extreme seriousness. They will know that we have entered a new stage when it comes to Russia's role in Syria, that no longer is it going to allow Syria's airspace to be violated so regularly and so willfully in violation of international law, it must be said, because it does threaten the lives of Russian servicemen who are operating in the country. And let's be clear, Israel is the prime violator in this regard. Over 200 Israeli airstrikes have been conducted against Syria, in Syria, since 2017. These were figures that were released by the IDF earlier this month, and only a fraction of those, it comes to light, have been accompanied by any forward notice being given to the Russians. So it's become untenable. 15 Russian servicemen were blown out of the sky. The Russians are clear, as they have been from the outset, that Israel was responsible for this atrocity, and perhaps in Tel Aviv they were lulled into a false sense of security by Vladimir Putin's initial conciliatory statement in response to this incident, but now they know differently.
So do you think this will prevent any perhaps further airstrikes then on Syria from the likes of Israel or the US or France or whoever? Or is there some sort of... Because when I look at this, I'm not entirely sure whether there's a no-fly zone across the whole of Syria, who exactly will be targeted. Do you think it could be used with some discretion or in certain situations and not others? Or is this just a very clear, simple message, don't try and bomb Syria?
Well, I don't think it's a blanket no-fly zone, but Russia does have the ability to enact a no-fly zone, to impose a no-fly zone, and it has done it for brief periods in the past. It may look again at doing so going forward. Russia's been very, very careful in terms of its intervention. It doesn't want to be seen as essentially mounting a blanket defence of Syrian territory, because it understands the complexities of the situation. But its priority has to be to protect its servicemen. And Russia's clear as well that these airstrikes, especially from Israel, as I said, Israel has been a prime driver of these airstrikes in the last year and a half, is only impeding the conflict on the ground, the ability to restore stability and security to Syria and to defeat the terrorist threat that threatens everyone in the region and the wider world. And so Russia's basically saying, what is your prime motivation when it comes to Syria? Is it to take advantage of Syria's difficulty in this time of conflict, to carry out a regional agenda, or is it to defeat terrorism, which impacts the security of citizens of all the countries in the region and in the wider West?
Looking at it differently, John, do you think this perhaps threatens too a potentially much bigger conflict, given that anything that's entering Syrian airspace could now be shot down?
Well, that threat comes from the countries that have been undertaking these airstrikes. It is simply untenable that Russian servicemen should be put in danger by multiple countries carrying out airstrikes in Syria any time that they wish. Syria is a Russian ally, and Russia is making clear that it's going to stand by its ally as far as it can, given the complexities of the situation. But it seems that countries such as Israel have taken advantage of Russia's rational stance when it comes to the conflict in Syria, and it's become emboldened to carry out these airstrikes as and when they so decide. And Israel, it should be borne in mind, is meant to be a friend and an ally of Russia, and clearly, according to the Russians, this latest incident is hardly in keeping with the actions of an ally. And the Israelis, I would suggest, need to bear in mind the sage words of English poet William Blake, when he said that it is easier to forgive an enemy than it is to forgive a friend. So things have entered a new stage in Syria. Many people will say that this is a long time coming. This air defence system, the S-300, had already been designated to be delivered to the Syrians as far back as 2013. It was suspended at the request of the Israelis by Moscow, and now Moscow says, well, now given what has happened and given that we believe Israel was responsible for this incident during which 15 of our servicemen were blown out of the sky, then we are now going to give the Syrians the ability to defend themselves and thereby help in the wider struggle to defeat terrorism and restore security and stability to the country.
OK, John, look, thanks for your time this afternoon. That was John White, a journalist based there in the UK. Thank you.